All right, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories to go into tonight. I want to talk about what's happening with the Taliban because you might remember this recent troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Actually, Trump wanted to get us out of there as well. This wasn't necessarily a bipartisan thing. They were talking about the process for it, what happens. The Taliban begins resurging. They're taking over parts of Afghanistan. They're killing local officials, doing assassinations, launching terror attacks. And now the question is on Biden of how he responds to it. One of the possibilities is, well, welcome back to the Afghan war, folks. That could be one possibility. The other is leave them to their own devices, but it's going to be complicated if that happens because it's a pretty big time commitment of the United States to let it fall back to the Taliban. So we'll have to see. At the same time, they're also talking now about how ISIS, remember that terrorist organization that was conquering, well, what was it, the entire Levant and other areas? Well, they're saying that ISIS may be here to stay as well. And ISIS was looking like it was going to be pretty much a major national player, not even just a terrorist group for a while. That ended pretty quick under Trump, but they're saying they're on the way back up as well. So we'll see what happens with it. I'm going to go into some stories on this. First, folks, I've noted a few times that we are totally demonetized by YouTube. We try to get it restored. I mentioned before that YouTube maintained the denial of our ads. They didn't really give us a reason for it. They said a channel connected to our account violated their standards. We have no idea what they're talking about or what happened. We just know that we're, still totally demonetized. So we do have Epoch TV, and Epoch TV is our uncensored video platform. We have some great stuff in the works. We have movies coming up soon. Quick preview of what's happening. We have a bunch of new shows coming on there. Crossroads is on there. All the exclusive interviews we have are on there. And also our special features are on there. And I've mentioned our special feature that I've been promising for a long time is going to be coming out very soon on August 14th. This is the, let's say, forgotten or unknown history of communism and what communism really is from the ideological perspective. Now, if you go back to the time of Marx and even early guys like, not that long ago, like Ludwig von Mises, they talk about communism as a metaphysical ideology, metaphysics, not economic theory. And really not much has been done on this, honestly. And so this documentary series, and it's going to be 10-minute episodes, is going to go into a lot of this really unknown history. I'll show you a quick trailer, folks, of what we're working on now with that. In every country communism gains power, authoritarianism and death followed in its wake. Communism promises a world without suffering, and yet, in its execution, does the exact opposite. Following Lenin's death, Stalin's 29-year reign killed an estimated 60 to 66 million people. More famines and purges would occur. The very peasants that communism was supposed to benefit instead starved to death under its rule. The party dictates what is right and wrong. Mao ended up killing between 50 million and 70 million people. As an investigative journalist, I want to understand why. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. And again, because we've gone and won the old YouTube Pulitzer, getting ourselves censored, we do have our new platform. That's Epoch TV. And so, folks, be sure to check it out. All you need if you want to watch some shows there, if you want a free trial, is an email address. So all you need is an email address. Check it out. That's epochtv.com/crossroads. All right, that said, folks, it's great seeing you all here. Let's jump into the first stories. And Molly John, he said, fantastic. Luke Pook, he said, can't wait. I saw a few of you mentioning the cyber symposium with Mike Lindell. I know it's a bit complicated, stuff coming out there. A lot of people are saying they can't really verify the full breadth of his claims, but I did see there's that 8chan founder guy, Code Monkey, was saying that it's his screen name, Code Monkey, was saying that he was able to verify some of it. So, I mean, we'll have to see what comes out from it. Yeah. Yeah, Florida girl, good Ashley. Luke Puka, yeah, the YouTube Pulitzer, here we come, right? All right. That said, folks, as always, around the halfway point, we're going to be going into questions. So if you have questions, leave them in the chat. And it helps if you write question, just so we have to sift through all the comments. It does help if you write questions. So again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Halfway mark will go into them. First, let's talk about what's happening with the Taliban, the semi-terrorist organization that we thought was going away, but is not going away, and they're now taking over Afghanistan once again. Now, real briefly, the Taliban has now seized the third largest city in Afghanistan. They're now moving into Kandahar, and American troops are being deployed all ready to evacuate some embassy staff in Afghanistan, according to the White House. And where we're at right now is that point where pretty much we have to decide which path we want to take as a nation, whether the United States re-engages in the Afghan war or whether we pull back from it. Now it says here, former U.S. diplomats say Biden must act swiftly to change course in Afghanistan. And it says Afghanistan is in a state of chaos. In a major military offensive, the Taliban has taken over 9 provincial capitals, with 2 falling to the militia on the night of August 10th. As the militant group ignores peace negotiations and as their killings of civilians, prisoners, and government leaders increase, a cry for a change in U.S. policy is growing louder. This is a quote, according to 5 former U.S. diplomats in Afghanistan in an analysis they published in the Atlantic Council. It says, given the Taliban's behavior lately, U.S. President Joe Biden's decision to rapidly withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan appears increasingly questionable. And so, while we've been in this long war for a long time, this long war may continue. And if the U.S. does pull out right now, there's a changing face of actual terrorism. You know, this whole domestic terror threat they're claiming, which we really haven't seen much evidence of. When it comes to the real terror movements, really ISIS being the main one, one of the big questions is going to be, how do these different terror cells, Taliban working closely with Al-Qaeda, align with ISIS? Remember, there were some ideological battles between Al-Qaeda and ISIS pretty early on. We'll have to see how they position themselves and see how things develop. But one of the big questions going forward is, well, folks, does this mean a restart of the Afghan war? I was covering Afghanistan quite a bit over the years, just doing different types of reporting. The Taliban always kind of said they were going to do this. They said, for example, that the Americans have the guns, the Americans have the power, but the Taliban has the clocks. In other words, they said time is on their side, because as soon as the U.S. withdraws, well, the Taliban's going to take over once again. And here we are, rapid withdrawal, and they're taking over once again. We'll see what this means. A couple important points on this. One is the Chinese Communist Party actually has very strong roles in Afghanistan. They mostly do like mining operations. They claim they're there as one of the peacekeeping nations. They just mine, they take resources. Remember that recent story, well, it's been a while now, maybe a couple months, where we talked about one of these individuals who's at one of the higher levels of the Chinese Communist Party, an advisory role. And what the Chinese Communist Party is talking about right now is waging unconventional war against the United States. And part of that strategy, they said, was getting the United States involved in 4 wars. What are the 4 brewing conflicts right now? This is important to watch. Well, they did mention Afghanistan as being one of them. Lo and behold, here we are again, Afghanistan starting up the Taliban's restarting the whole war there, it seems. North Korea is becoming aggressive yet again. Iran is becoming more aggressive yet again. Russia's holding military drills. Let's see what happens with it, because Biden may be pulling kind of what Nixon did with the Chinese Communist Party during the Cold War, where he went to China and broke the kind of China-Russia alignment to an extent. Of course, there's different analysis on that. Some people say that, well, Russia and China were kind of playing the U.S. and that. At the time, they were having the Amur Valley conflict, where Russia and China were actually fighting a war with each other in the Amur Valley. Nixon goes in, offers trading negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party, believing it would break the CCP from Russia. Here we are, right? That had mixed results, of course. The CCP took advantage of international systems through that, but now you have Biden going to Russia, possibly breaking some ties between the CCP and Russia. We'll have to see what that actually breaks their ties, because maybe it won't happen. But he's opening up trade negotiations when it comes to oil deals with Russia, while restricting U.S. oil. We'll see where this goes. You do have the signs brewing of what we've been talking about. The CCP has been saying they're going to do for a long time, now taking place. I'll give you updates on this as we go forward, folks. That said, I mentioned again that we are totally demonetized by YouTube. We have Epoch TV if you want to support us, but we also have sponsors. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure, and it's becoming more relevant. You have to make sure you do everything you can to protect yourself when emailing and messaging online, because you don't really have privacy. Everything you do online, including sending emails, is often scanned and monitored. Your data is under the magnifying glass of big tech and, well, probably big government too in a lot of places. Now, however, there's a legitimate privacy tool online for sending emails and messages. It's a new privacy and cybersecurity application called Secure. That's Secur. Now, Secure offers private and secure instant messaging and email, and its servers and data centers are hosted in Switzerland. And this is important because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world, meaning that if a country wants to get your data, they have to go through very, very, very strict guards around your privacy in Switzerland. Now, one of the ways that companies get around that and government gets around that are through, well, technologies used within the software or system you've built. Secure doesn't do that. Now, Secure uses proprietary encryption technology and an independent platform, meaning they're not subject to the Cloud Act, which is in the US. Pretty much all technologies under the Cloud Act have to be viewable by the government. And so if you use American technology, it's under the Cloud Act. Secure is not under the Cloud Act. Secure also does not mine your data. Now, using Secure, you can easily communicate with people who have the app and those who don't. You can also set a timer that will automatically destroy messages or emails after you send them. Secure also uses technology that lets you communicate without fear that your internet provider, your IP address, your IP, will monitor your emails or messages. And that's also without the need of a VPN. Now, it costs only $5 for the messenger and $10 for the email and messenger package. You can take back your privacy and your freedom today. Visit secure.com and you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And again, big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, that said, let's go into a few more stories for the night. And again, around the halfway point, we're going to questions. So if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. There's a pattern taking place in the United States, and it's something we touched on a bit the other night, I think during the question section, which is, let's say, the overarching programs that are increasingly risking putting businesses out of business, that are increasingly putting pressure on businesses, that are making it so landlords might have to sell properties or people have to default on their properties, which means that, well, banks have to probably buy them up or the government may get them. One of the big concerns with this whole trajectory is whether we're moving towards more centralization. In other words, the small guys, small business owners, regular landlords are losing. They're the ones going out of business. The big, megalithic corporations, Amazons, and major companies that own real estate in cities like New York, they're making out well. They're laughing all the way to the bank, so to speak, and they're probably going to be getting a whole lot more. Market share because, well, their competitors are going out of business. This is one of the ironies, actually, of socialism, and also one of the reasons why big business tends to actually support socialist policy. One of the big ironies, because I'm sure many of you have young socialist friends. I know I do. So I'm my age. I guess I'm still technically young. I have socialist friends who, they believe that socialism is your greatest tool for fighting against corporate oligarchy. The problem with that is socialism typically leads to corporate oligarchy. Can we name a single socialist country that actually got rid of big business? you could argue they took away private ownership of it, but it was always just put under state ownership. You still had the factories, you still had all the big businesses, you still had all the problems that existed before. The only difference was that average people got pushed out of the marketplace. If you want to succeed, you have to become part of the party, essentially. Now, one of the big ironies in the United States is as we push for democratic socialism, really, ironically, a form of national socialism, you could call it, fascism, frankly, where government just basically works hand in hand with big corporations, is that actually it's a lot of times the big businesses that are pushing these policies, financing these programs, and getting involved very heavily in them. Why would they do that? It's because probably they're putting their competitors out of business. One of the big ironies of overregulation is that typically the big corporations have the legal bandwidth to handle it. It's the small businesses, it's the medium businesses that cannot handle it. And so overregulation tends to put their competitors out of business, and they're all for it. Now, this being said, there's a few major issues taking place in the United States that really show us moving in this direction. And I want to go over some of this. Now, first off, this whole rent moratorium, let's go over what's happening with it. Because they're saying protracted rent moratorium is forcing small landlords out of business. It's the small landlords, not the major corporations running these things. And it says here, extended rent moratoriums and the slow distribution of billions in federal rent assistance are driving many small landlords to call it quits. And they're saying, this is one person, Diana Bard, executive director of the Lake Erie Landlord Association, said, nobody wants to become a landlord anymore. And we have had very few new people entering into the business. The Lake Erie Landlord Association represents landlords in northern Ohio, southern Michigan, and western Pennsylvania. John Frederick Smith, president of the South Wisconsin Landlord Association, also told the Epoch Times, multiple landlords have told me they are selling out. They ask us how to get out of the business and how to get the tenants out of their houses. These are mom and pop operators, the kind of landlords that are willing to take the tenants with bad credit or criminal history. This will only add to the housing crisis. And the vast majority of landlords in the United States are individuals, with most owning one or two rental houses. Now, what happens if you have most landlords in the United States being individuals who just own one or two properties, suddenly not being able to make a profit or make a living as landlords? Well, they're probably going to have to sell them. They're probably going to have to default on them. They're probably going to try and get out of the business. And what happens then? Well, the banks either get a hold of it, or while big businesses buy them up for dirt cheap prices, because who wants them at that point, right? What you're going to have is centralization. What you're moving towards is more centralization. That's one part of it. Now, let's go over a couple more parts of this. In Los Angeles, just like New York, they're going to create ordinances requiring vaccinations to enter restaurants and retail stores. Now, briefly on this, in New York, you have mass protests taking, well, not mass, you have fairly large protests taking place against these policies, because a lot of restaurants actually don't support these policies. They're seeing that winter is coming in New York, which means you can't have outdoor dining. It's very hard to make a living after they've already been under really heavy financial stress from the last lockdowns. And now they're finding that they can't serve people unless the individuals have got their vaccine cards, proof of vaccination. And what happens then, they have to question whether people are vaccinated or not, and they have to tell them to get out of the restaurant if they aren't. What happens if you're with a group of friends and maybe two of you are vaccinated and one isn't? Well, you're going to have to choose where you go and where you don't go, or you don't go out. And businesses are realizing now the effects this is going to have on them. Let's go over it. It says here, the Los Angeles City Council unanimously voted August 11th to prepare an ordinance that will require people to show proof of at least partial COVID-19 vaccination to enter public indoor spaces in the city, including restaurants, bars, gyms, entertainment venues, and retail stores. The ordinance is more restrictive than a policy recently enacted in New York City, which focuses more on entertainment-oriented public spaces, such as restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues, and excludes retail stores, at least for now. Now, the motion was introduced last week by Council President Nuri Martinez and Councilman Mitch O'Farrell. Not fully passed yet, but introduced. And folks, one of the big things with this is what happens if these mom and pop stores go out of business? What happens if retail goes out of business? Well, people are going to have to buy online. Who owns the biggest online marketplaces? Which big businesses are the ones that control most online shipping and marketing? Well, Amazon. Um, really, Amazon and some of these big companies like this, big corporations like Walmart and Target and Best Buy and these big guys, Amazon being the biggest, of course. What's going to happen? Well, competitors go out of business. It means the brick and mortar stores, the mom and pop stores are going to be the ones going out of business if they pass this, which means, again, that the big business socialists, and a lot of them are openly socialist, are going to be the ones laughing all the way to the bank yet again, because they have government policy shutting down their competitors. What happens if restaurants go out of business? Well, you're going to have probably Grubhub and Seamless doing a lot of deliveries. You're going to have people getting food deliveries rather than going out, right? It's centralization. You're having the smaller businesses go out of business, probably, a lot more at least. And you're going to have the bigger businesses step in to control more of the market space. Now, another part on here, and then I want to go into a few other stories. There's also another story here. It says Coalition for a Democratic Workplace blasts Democratic plan to make union dues deductible. Let's go into this. It says a coalition of more than 600 business groups across the country is condemning a Democratic proposal in Congress. This is currently just a proposal to make compulsory union dues tax deductible. Personally, I don't like compulsory union dues in the first place, but let's go into this a bit more. It says here, this is a quote, requiring taxpayers to subsidize union dues as part of the Democratic Senate budget plan favors unions and their political allies over workers and small businesses. Coalition for a Democratic Workplace Chairman Kristen Swearingen said in a news release, and continued stating Congress should focus on policies that support all working Americans, including those that increase individual deductions related to job training, rather than pushing tax breaks for unions that support and fund Democratic politicians and causes. Swearingen continued and added, rewriting our nation's tax code solely to benefit big labor bosses will not help businesses and workers across the country get back on their feet after the damage caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. What does this mean, folks? Keep in mind, the unions are the ones that oftentimes lobby government. Some of the big lobby organizations, many of them lean heavy left, although it's across the board to an extent. The teachers' unions are the ones that prevent a lot of reform in our schools. And the teachers' unions are also one of the major groups that's rallying for things like critical race theory and also trying to push our government to, again, cater more to these types of things. Now, a lot of these things are mandated. If you're a teacher, you have compulsory union fees. You're not allowed to say you don't want to pay your union fees. Remember, Trump got rid of that policy. They brought it back. And what they're saying now is that rather than get rid of that policy, rather than forcing people, right, rather than getting rid of the policy that forces people to join unions, meaning the union is just part of the corporate structure now, right? They're just part of the way government works, part of the way business works. In other words, not like the unions of old, right? What does that mean? It means taxpayers are then subsidizing unions. Taxpayer money is going to subsidize the unions because it's tax deductible if they keep it, which means these unions then are acting as political actors, oftentimes using taxpayer dollars, meaning the government is financing organizations that basically control all the workforce in the country, which are then rallying voters for their own political interests. In other words, you're subsidizing essentially voting drives. You're subsidizing, using taxpayer dollars, voting drives. And again, it's one thing if it's taxpayer dollars, it's already happening. It's another thing if they make it tax deductible, because then it makes it so that government is actually covering the cost of it, technically, which is actually very bizarre. Strange stuff going on, folks. Now, my take on this, this is one of the big issues you have. My personal opinion, I do try to keep my opinion out of things, but I think in this context, it's necessary. My personal opinion is you shouldn't compel people to pay union fees. I think that defeats the whole purpose of having a union. I think unions should be relatively independent, and it's people getting together and saying, making their demands that they're going to quit, things like this, old school unions. The modern unions are just pretty much like organized crime rings a lot of times. You're getting into syndicalism, socialist syndicalism in a lot of places where you have these organized unions working like mafias, controlling the government oftentimes. Now, when you compel people to pay for it, I think that's a broken system. It defeats the whole idea of having unions, in my opinion. Now, what happens then when you eliminate that system? What happens then when you make people subsidize, when you have people basically subsidizing it rather than getting rid of it? Now, I won't get too into this again. One of the issues you have a lot of times with policies meant to get rid of bad policies is that rather than pull away policy, they add new policy on top of it. This kind of policy bloat. Rather than fix a broken system, right? Rather than fix a broken system, they subsidize it. They subsidize it. The same thing with medicine. I know a lot of socialists in this country are all for subsidizing healthcare because American healthcare costs are through the roof. I mean, really, if I ever had an accident, unless it was like life-threatening, I'm not calling an ambulance. It's almost a joke about Americans, actually. It's like, no, don't call an ambulance. I'll survive. It's because healthcare costs are through the roof in this country. They're ridiculous. The problem is interventionist policies make it so. It's because government has programs, for example, to set prices of pharmaceutical drugs. It's because you have subsidized federal healthcare programs that intervene in the system that drive up prices. Now, what do? Do you fix it by getting rid of some of the regulations and some of the policies that are causing the high cost of healthcare? Would you get rid of the policies that are causing it to cost so much? Or do you subsidize it through socialism? In other words, do you fix the problem or do you subsidize a broken system? That's the problem with this. Same thing with school costs. University costs are through the roof. You have kids basically working as like debt slaves for their entire lives. I know people who went to college 20 years ago and they're still paying off their college student loan, their student loans. Why is that? It's because you have, again, government interventionist policies, federal loans, paying for these schools, and schools then don't have an incentive to have to give out loans and give classes that are reasonable so that people can find careers and actually have a chance of paying them back. In other words, if you file for bankruptcy, normally your debts go away, not if it's a student loan, right? What does that mean then? Do you get rid of the interventionist policies subsidizing a broken system that create this broken system? Do you fix the broken system? Or do you introduce state policy like government mandates where you have free student, basically getting rid of student loans to subsidize a broken system, to make people subsidize a system that is broken? Subsidized failure. This is one of the main traits of socialism. You take a broken system and rather than fix it, you subsidize it. And you have the same thing now happening with the unions. Now, what is the trajectory of all of this? Taking this whole picture, you have, landlords going out of business. The banks probably are going to gain control of a lot of properties, and a lot of big businesses that control a lot of the real estate are going to gain more control over it. You're going to have centralization of real estate, in other words. And once you have centralization of real estate, what does that mean? It means lack of competition within the real estate markets, which means price setting, means other things like that. At the same time, you're going to have a lot of businesses, because of these COVID lockdowns, going out of business yet again because of the vaccine passports. If restaurants start going out of business, if retailers start going out of business, if entertainment venues start going out of business, what happens? A smaller pool of big corporations that have been able to basically make it through because they have the money to do so are going to be the ones that maintain, that stay open. In other words, again, you're going to have this centralization, a more centralization under big business rather than small and medium businesses. And this is the trajectory with this. And at the same time as well, government subsidizing the unions that are controlling a lot of these workforces and so on, meaning politicizing the remaining workforces. Frankly, bizarre stuff, folks. All right, that said, let's go into some questions because it's 11 o'clock Eastern time. I know where you all are at. But here in New Jersey, and I moved to Jersey, by the way, It's 11 o'clock. So first off, though, I have mentioned that, again, we're totally demonetized by YouTube. We can't, if we were just had YouTube, we wouldn't be able to make a living. But luckily, we thought ahead and we began developing our own platform ahead of time. And now we have Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com, meaning we can keep the show going here and then provide a lot of exclusive content over on Epoch TV to keep everything afloat, keep everything running. Now, check it out, folks, EPOCHTV.com/Crossroads. We have a lot of special features there. We have a lot of our interviews are there. We have a lot of new programs we're bringing on. We have movies we're in the works of getting the rights to. A lot of really cool stuff. I'll show you a quick trailer of what we're working on right now.
We have a country to save. It sounds cliche, right? I mean, it sounds like a political candidate. We've got a country to save, but it really is the truth. We're possibly at the end of the American experiment right now, because for 250 years in America, you had parties that had a different vision for America, but basically believed America was good. But right now, we have half of the political dialect that basically doesn't think America is good. That is a huge problem. That basically wants to erase America's history. That is a huge problem. Whether you're purely a libertarian or you're a more traditional conservative, it's like, that actually doesn't really matter right now. I want to defend the Constitution, rule of law, individual rights, the notion that the founding of America was good. These are all good things.
All right, again, that's Dave Rubin. And one of the exclusive interviews we have over on Epoch TV. So again, check it out, folks. And big thanks out to Dave Rubin for the interview as well. All right, that says jump into some questions for the night. First off, from Liz R. Question, why Jersey? As I mentioned, I moved to New Jersey. You know, one of the great things about New York, which is where I recently moved from, is that everywhere else looks a lot better. And New Jersey, from the perspective of most of the rest of America, does not look very nice. From the perspective of coming from New York, it's fantastic. And so I can still work in the city. I can still do my normal job in the city while not having to deal with the crazy politics of the city. So basically, that's why Jersey. I know it's not as nice as some places around the country I'd like to live, but it's still decent. Yeah. You know, Jersey. There's a joke about Jersey, and it's the things to do in New Jersey, and then there's one answer, and it's leave. And, but no, I like it. I actually like it here. From EX8, he said, "When are you guys going to have merch, Josh?" You know, we were meaning to make some merchandise for Crossroads for a while. The problem was when we got demonetized by YouTube, they closed down our ability to have a marketplace on here as well. So basically, YouTube has a system that makes it real easy to have merchandise for shows, and they shut down our ability to do that. Maybe we can see if there's an external platform we can do it on. I know there's some cool stuff out there. We will look into it, but lately our focus has just been kind of building up Epoch TV. But I do want to get merchandise eventually on here. This is from SW9 Tales. He said, "I subscribe because I believe in you. Can you tell me why you did not cover the Cyber Symposium over the last 3 days?" This is Mike Lindell's Cyber Symposium. "I need an answer, or while I've lost faith in your reporting." The reason we haven't covered it is because we're reporting. We're not just writing about claims. There's even the people who are there with Mike Lindell, and we're on good terms with Mike Lindell. Even some of the people there are noting some pretty serious issues with some of the claims. For example, was it 37 terabytes of data, he said. I know that CodeMonkey was not able to verify that. CodeMonkey was actually brought in by Mike to try to verify some of the information. He was not able to verify some of it. He did, however, claim that some of the files do appear to be what they claim they are, but it's not as much as what they claim. We'll have to see what it is. They're talking about the voting machines and so on. Washington Times had an article noting that they had these cybersecurity experts and they could not in any way replicate the findings or prove anything. And this has been kind of the problem we've had as well with covering a lot of this. If you're going to make accusations on that scale, you need to have the evidence to prove it. And frankly, we don't have the evidence to prove it. I mean, it's it's not responsible. Let's just put it that way. It's fine to write about claims, and I know Mike says he has all this evidence. The problem is that people, even within his own team, looking into the evidence, have noted that not all the evidence is there. And so, as a reporter, I can't just report rumors. We can't just report rumors. You know what I mean? Especially when something affects, I think, national interest to this scale, and getting something wrong is going to have consequences. I think, they could use, if you get something wrong when it comes to investigating the election, they're going to use that one wrong thing to try to discredit everything. And so you do have to make sure you check all your boxes, you do all your reporting, you do all your footwork. I'm not saying in any way that what Mike is doing isn't, credible, because I think maybe he has everything. Maybe he does have everything. But what he's provided publicly is not enough for journalists to actually verify it. And so until we can verify it, we can't responsibly really report it. That's the issue we've been having. But I mean, if you do follow our content, you will know that we cover, if you watch the documentary I did last year about the elections, you'll see we've covered most information that's out there already, we've covered. And most of what's happening across the country with the election investigations, you've also covered. And so we have been staying on top of all the reporting that we can verify. We have been staying on top of that. Another question here from Cameron Bacon. He said, question, Josh, will Crossroads be adding back any content that's exclusively for Epoch TV subscribers? Because I'd totally pay for an additional 30 minutes of Crossroads Q&A. I would love to do, a couple things on that. I would love to do the Q&As more nights a week. I know I used to do them 6 nights a week, and part of me really wants to do them 6 nights a week again. I still do them 3 nights a week. Part of the reason we stopped doing that is because I wanted to start working on the special feature content and documentaries. For example, like the America Rewritten documentary we just had, like the virus investigation we did last year. Big update on that very soon. Hint, hint. And also the election investigation we did several months during the elections now. And more in the works, actually a lot more in the works. So not doing those every night gives me a couple extra days a week, a few extra days a week, where I'm able to work on these bigger projects that I think can have a lot more impact. And of course, I still travel a lot, and I do a lot of interviews on the road. We are working on some, it's not, maybe it won't be visible on the surface, but I'm working on some stuff on the back end to, I think, really enhance some of the content we're making on Crossroads. And so I think you'll see that although I'm not doing as many Q&As, I'm still doing 3 a week, and don't worry, these aren't changing. We're going to be doing some much more in-depth content as well. So stay tuned for that. That said, we have other shows starting up, some lives. If you watch Roman Balmakov, the Epoch Times ad guy, I know he's starting a live Q&A as well. We also have a lot of other programs we're trying to bring on right now. Travel programs we're looking into. We're looking to get in some movies. We're looking to buy some documentaries as well. And we're looking to be able to start financing some content once we get a good pool going. In other words, we're turning this into kind of like a freedom Netflix. It's a way to think about it. Like a full-scale video platform is what we want to build. And not just entertainment, but also news, analysis, and so on. Epoch TV is going to have some great stuff. And so we are working on this. And a lot there already if you check it out. This is from David D. He said, question, where can we find a recommended reading list from you? History, politics, etc. Thank you for your hard work. And I've been talking about doing a reading list for a while. I did an episode a while back where I did go over several books, and we went through some of it. I keep meaning to do it, Okay, so I'll give you guys the background on this. Basically, I talked about doing a book list, a reading list. I also talked about doing the communism series. Basically, I started working on the communism series, and we were wanting to do like kind of a video, maybe a couple of videos about some of the books as well. I was working on the communism series. I got diverted slightly to work on the America Rewritten documentary, and then also another big project I can't quite announce just yet that might be released within the next month or two. So I'm restraining myself. Some great stuff in the works, let's put it that way. And so, of course, we're now releasing the series on communism, the history of it, starting on August 14th. That's going to be a several-part series we're working on. And so we are working on it. But we are also, I think once that's all done with, I would still like to do something with some of the books as well. Now, you can see 2 of the bookshelves behind me. I actually have 3 others that you can't see in the shot. And I have, if you ever see my desk in the office, it's just stacked with books as well. So when I do these big projects, I tend to read a ton of books. The America Rewritten one, I think I went through like a dozen-ish books for that. And so I just keep adding to the collection, basically. And I would love to give you all some recommendations. Let's see, another question here. No, man. Yeah, this is from Larison Many Goats. He said, question, hey, Josh, did Arnold Schwarzenegger really say, screw your freedom? Yes. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California, did a recent interview. I can't remember which media platform he did it on, where he did say, screw your freedom, talking about the virus vaccine mandates and so on. I mean, yeah, basically the idea is basically the idea he's getting at is whether your freedom is impacting the health of others. One problem you have with that is that there is historical precedent in terms of government policy that does allow local government to mandate vaccines and so on when they regard it as a public health crisis. You had this happen during the measles outbreaks, for example. And so there is precedent for it, but the problem we have with that precedent is that there are limits to it, and it has to be within kind of like reasonable bounds. And I would say what they've done with this COVID outbreak in terms of lockdowns, in terms of shutting down businesses, in terms of the amount of time it's been going on for, I'd say it's already far exceeded reasonable policy. But take it for what it's worth. Everyone has their own viewpoints on this. But on your question, yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger did say, screw your freedom. This is also from Larison. You said, hey, Josh, why isn't the Taliban infected with COVID-19? Yeah, good question. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not reporting it. Who knows? This is one issue that Trump brought up when you had the virus outbreaks last year. Keep in mind that Trump actually still takes credit for the fact that the vaccines are out. Trump was not anti-vaccine by any means. Actually, when Trump was still president, it was the Democrats, including like Kamala Harris, who were anti-vaccine, and a lot of them were openly questioning whether they would actually take the vaccine because it was the Trump vaccine. Trump leaves office, Biden comes in, now the tables are turned. One problem, but back on the point though of Taliban and so on. One thing that Trump was mentioning when he was still president, when people were criticizing the high number of cases in the United States, he was saying, well, it's because we're actually counting, and a lot of countries just aren't counting. You have a lot of countries that had very low numbers. It's because they weren't counting. How are you gonna test people in like the back mountains of Afghanistan and stuff? You're probably not. I really doubt all the Taliban members in their caves or whatever were getting their vaccine test kit or getting their virus test kits delivered to them and so on. Chances are they weren't actually testing for it. Yeah. Let's see a couple more questions here. This is from Mark Morris. You say, question, is Bill Gates buying the vaccine from China? You're talking about the Sinovac vaccine. The patent for the China vaccine has graphene oxide in it. I have had some people send me reports on this, and maybe I need to get an expert to talk about it. So there are some very weird overlaps with Bill Gates and Fauci and some of the patents in China and some of the programs working with the Chinese Communist Party and so on. There's a lot of really complex overlap. You do have organizations tied to both Gates and George Soros that are working on the test kits for the virus. There are weird things like this. You mentioned the patent for the China vaccine has graphene oxide in it. I have people sent, the way I analyze things, I don't necessarily accept or reject things a lot of times. My take is I will regard things as possibility until I can prove or disprove them. And so I don't have a problem I don't really have a problem looking at information and reading reports, even if I can't fully verify them, because that's how you verify things, right? Now, someone did send me a report on graphene oxide, which looked pretty credible, which talked about how they could allegedly use, I believe it was graphene oxide, as a way to like remote control people. It sounded a bit bizarre, but the paper did seem pretty credible. Who knows at this point, folks? The stuff's so wild with a lot of this. I mean, it's hard to even tell what's what. Yeah, and the problem is because of the censorship policies from the World Health Organization, from media enforcing it, and media running the fact-check organizations, which are then used by big tech to censor people and shut down channels and so on. It's very hard to even have, really logical debate when you can't even talk about a lot of things. You can't even have discussions, analyzing a lot of this stuff. You can't even go into it because they'll just delete your videos. And so this is one of the big issues we have with this virus and with a lot of the research coming out of the vaccines, is that it's hard to actually have even discussions about it because of cancel culture and the way that big tech is working together with these fact checkers, which are working for the big, which are sometimes either part of or offshoots of the big media, which are working with big government on these policies. It's a very bizarre situation. How do you then, it's restricting basic journalism, frankly. But on your question, yes, I have read about graphene oxide. It does seem pretty concerning. And if the vaccines do contain it, I think that should set off some concerns, especially the Sinovac vaccine, the Chinese one. I'm not sure if Bill Gates is buying the vaccine from China, but I do know there's a lot of weird overlap behind the scenes. Another one from last question, then we'll go into some more stories. This is from Scott Teeds. He said, Josh, what are your thoughts on the cyber symposium? That's Mike Lindell's cyber symposium. I know it's a bit across the board right now. You had people giving speeches and getting like lawsuits filed against them, like while they're still on stage. We'll see what comes out from it. The problem you have with it, again, is that not all of the research they claim they have is public. In other words, independent researchers aren't able to go and verify it. Guys like me, I can't actually verify it. If I can't verify it, then I'm going on someone else's claims. And if I'm going on someone else's claims, they need to be credible enough for me to be willing to, get a $1.6 billion lawsuit against me or something like that, And also, I think derailing a lot of the legitimate findings about what happened in the 2020 election, especially as you have these audits rolling through. That's one of the big issues you have. A couple points on that. Washington Times, as I mentioned, did try to verify some of the cyber findings. They claim they could not verify them. I do know that some of the individuals who were supposed to speak at the summit were not able to speak. I know that one of the Montgomery guys allegedly had a heart attack and so was not able to present his findings. The other main guy they were supposed to have speak about it didn't show up. They did bring in Code Monkey, and I followed his stuff. I think he does great work. He wasn't able to fully verify all of it. He said that there wasn't as much data as they claimed there was. He said there were several, I think, gigabytes, not terabytes, that he was able to look into, which do appear to be from the voting machines. And so there is some validity to it. We'll have to see what comes out from it. We'll have to see, again, what happens once all the information is made public and we can actually go through it and then try to verify it ourselves and report on it. Yeah. Anyways, folks, that's us. Jump into some more stories. We'll have to see what comes out from it, again, because not everything is being fully made public. Until things are fully made public, it's hard to report on the deeper findings and significance of a lot of it. Yeah, real quick. Yeah, Chevelle, one of the main guys, allegedly one of the main sources of Mike's findings, Mr. Montgomery had a heart attack, according to sources I have who were attending the conference. And so, again, we'll have to see what comes up from this. All right, folks, that says, jump into some more stories. I want to talk real quick about what's happening with China, because China is coming, I think, front and center amidst a lot of this. A lot of the policies around the world right now are based on the Chinese Communist Party's model. Oh, yeah, and real quick, this is an important point from Selena L. Mike Lindell was also attacked. Somebody attacked Mike Lindell, which is pretty significant. He's okay. He was speaking about it not long after, but he was attacked amidst all this. All right, that said, let's jump into what's happening with China. Now, an important point that I've been saying a few times now is that the Chinese Communist Party really established the model that a lot of countries are using for this virus. This included the way that they seeded the virus around the world. This included the way that, they lied to the world about saying we have it under control, keep your borders open while they spread the virus, while, again, the Chinese Communist Party locked down travel internally in China from Wuhan, but allowed people to travel outside of China, seeding the virus to every corner of the world. Then they created the policy of dealing with the virus, which was the mask mandates, right? Which was the mask mandates, which was the vaccine passports. Which was the mask mandates, which was the lockdowns, which was the economic shutdowns. Then they have the program of building back from the virus, which is the vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, which is the digital currency they're trying to roll out in terms of economic recovery, they claim, and also a program of state capitalism where the government is going to be trying to control all the businesses. In China, they call it the mixed model economy. And as I've been talking about, the centralization of big business and government working together here in the United States as these policies roll forward, you might see similar things happening. Again, we'll have to see what happens with it. Just stepping back one note, because I know a lot of you are mentioning the symposium still. I have been following the findings from Code Monkey. He has been making his stuff public, and actually, I think his findings are pretty significant. I think between Code Monkey's findings, just on the elections, between Code Monkey's findings and the election audits, which are still in the process of wrapping up, and when Mike fully releases all of his research, I think we will have a lot to go through, and so keep you all updated on that. Now, back to China, though, there's a few other parts to this, which is actually the policies they're having right now of, last episode, last Q&A, we talked about these COVID camps that the CDC was talking about. And yes, the CDC actually did have reports on this. We, in fact, in the last episode, showed the actual CDC website page talking about COVID camps. Saying that they would have 3 different ways of doing it if they were to do it. One would be locking people in their homes, which they did, which is still being practiced if you have to quarantine. That was stage 1. Stage 2 would be locking down people in, say, holding facilities such as hotels and so on. That's already being done, such as with illegal aliens coming into the United States and are being put into facilities as they're waiting to, be fully released into the country. And stage 3 is actual camps. Now, in the United States, we've not yet seen those camps, although on a strange note, you might have seen that FEMA, everyone talks about these FEMA camps. FEMA did send out an emergency alert test, which I think sounded a lot of alarms on that and got a lot of people concerned about it. We'll have to see. But as we speak right now, the Chinese Communist Party is in fact implementing that third policy on a very large scale. They were already barricading people in their homes. They were already doing a lot of that stuff. There was already a lot of that happening. But now they have even like little capsule type rooms they're putting people in that look like really poor quality prisons where they're segregating people or keeping them separated as you again have these virus outbreaks. One of the big concerns now is whether they'd actually do something like that in the United States. We'd have to see because the CDC did write about it and we've already practiced the first 2 of the 3 tiers that they've discussed, right? But as this happens right now, the Chinese Communist Party is doing a lot of other things internally. One of the big moves with this is this whole issue between, remember Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, this Chinese telecom giant, arrested in Canada, risking extradition to the United States to face charges, pretty serious charges. What does the Chinese Communist Party do? It goes and arrests Canadian citizens and basically holds them hostage and risks, says they're going to probably execute them. Then tells the Canadian government, we can make a hostage exchange, essentially, that if you let Meng Wanzhou go, we'll let your people go. In other words, a hostage situation. This is the kind of stuff terrorists do. Now, the Chinese Communist Party has drawn international condemnation after giving a very hefty sentence against one of these individuals, a Michael Spavor. And this happens again as Meng Wanzhou, CFO of Huawei, is back in court. It says here, The United States and the international community issued a slew of statements in a growing chorus of condemnation over China's hefty sentencing of Canadian businessman Michael Spavor. Spavor's sentence of 11 years in prison, dealt by a Chinese court on Wednesday, was immediately condemned by Canada, as well as by representatives from the United States and 24 other governments, who attended a news conference at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing in a show of solidarity. Now, as this moves forward, you've actually been seeing really the trajectory that Trump started on standing up to the Chinese Communist Party is continuing. And it doesn't seem that this is going to change. Actually, this was one of my big questions as the Biden administration moved into the White House on where things would be going. Because honestly, folks, one of my main beats has been China and Chinese subversion going back to 2008. And for me, the biggest threat to this country in the long term is going to be the Chinese Communist Party. And so for me, this is a big issue. My big question is, to be totally frank, before Trump came into office, I didn't think anything could even be done about Chinese subversion. It is so pervasive. It affects so many experts, so many academics, so many journalists, so many businesses, so many politicians who have been coerced by the Chinese Communist Party and are basically eating out of their hand and playing along with their games. The number of people who have been, subverted by the Chinese Communist Party is massive. And the way I saw it at the time before Trump was, it was pretty much beyond the point where you could turn it back. It was very far along. Trump comes in and proves me wrong. Trump then starts hitting them with sanctions, starts going after them, wages full-scale trade war against them, and really had the Chinese Communist Party really on the ropes right when the pandemic hit and things looked like they were going to be very bad for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, internally, the CCP is still reeling from a lot of that. They haven't really fully recovered from it, but they have a lot of foreign control. They have a lot of influence abroad. They control a lot of experts. They control a lot of journalists. They control a lot of Hollywood. They control a whole lot of the influencers in other countries. In fact, if you want to watch who's probably the people who have been co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party, look at the ones defending the CCP right now. But one of my big questions was, will this trend continue of nations taking harder stances against the CCP? And yes, the answer seems to be yes. Maybe not as much as Trump was doing, not to the extent where he was really kind of proactively going after them, but it is moving in that direction. And it's interesting to see that this is not just even a U.S. trajectory right now. This is an international trajectory. India is operating against the CCP independently of all of this. Australia, Japan are also taking much stronger stances. And so you do have a lot of this moving in that direction. Now on this, Joe Biden is going to be convening a summit to rally democracies against authoritarianism, which is being interpreted as a move against the Chinese Communist Party. And guess who wants to join? Taiwan. Taiwan being an independent country off the south of China, the island of Formosa, which the Chinese Communist Party claims ownership over, and which would say otherwise, because really used to be considered the actual government in exile of China. The Chinese Communist Party was considered the illegitimate government of China. The Kuomintang in Taiwan was considered the legitimate government. Notably, real quick, I don't want to go too deep into this, but the Kuomintang has since kind of flipped, and they're more like the pro-CCP party. But the anti-Chinese Communist Party has won in Taiwan. And so Taiwan is taking a strong stance also against the Chinese Communist Party and is looking to show more influence on the world stage against the Chinese Communist Party. Now, briefly on this, it says U.S. President Joe Biden will convene a summit for democracy with other world leaders in December, the White House said on August 11th. This is in an effort to shore up faith in democratic governments and defend against authoritarianism. The action is widely seen as a response to the Chinese Communist Party and its leader Xi Jinping, who in his speeches has vowed to see that the ruling totalitarian party in China shapes mankind's common future by promoting what they call socialism with Chinese characteristics. And Taiwan, an independent, self-ruled, liberal democratic island that the Chinese Communist Party wants to claim as part of its own territory, expressed its wish to participate in Biden's Democracy Summit after the White House announcement. And if they do let Taiwan into it, this is going to be a huge, huge insult to the Chinese Communist Party, which will be very interesting to watch. At the same time, and I know it's getting late, but just one more story on this. The straw that could break the camel's back, so to speak, and well, more than just a straw, I'd say the biggest issue in China right now, and one that really not a lot of people are talking about. The biggest weak point of the Chinese Communist Party is not military. The biggest weak point is not economy. The biggest weak point of the Chinese Communist Party is ideology. This is why they censor the internet. This is why a lot of Chinese people to this day think that the democracy protesters ahead of the Tiananmen Square massacre just went home. This is why the Chinese Communist Party has the 50-cent army of paid internet trolls who go into chat rooms on YouTube and Twitter and so on to spread CCP talking points. This is why they do that. This is why they have the Great Firewall of China to prevent people from accessing information outside. It's because ideology is their biggest weakness. Right? Their crimes against humanity cannot withstand scrutiny. And the biggest one is the 100 million Falun Gong practitioners who are being persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party, including with live organ harvesting. And guess who's now making a big point about this? Let's go into it. It says here, persecution of Falun Gong is in effect genocide, according to a former U.S. official. And it says, in an exclusive interview with Dr. Miles Yu, the former U.S. State Department official explained that there is more evidence of a genocide perpetrated against Falun Gong in China than the plentiful such evidence of a genocide against the Uyghurs. In other words, they've now designated the persecution of the Uyghurs as a genocide. They have not yet designated the persecution of Falun Gong as a genocide, even though there's actually more evidence of Falun Gong, the persecution against Falun Gong practitioners being a genocide. Meaning that, well, why is the world not designating it as such? If this happens, this is going to mark, I think, a huge, huge blow against the CCP. Now, it says both the Trump and Biden administrations have designated the repression of the Uyghurs in China as a genocide. You advised former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo when he was in office on strategies related to China, and now you is in effect supporting the view there is not only a Uyghur genocide, but one against the Falun Gong. Falun Gong is a peaceful religion that was popularized in China during the early 1990s, which is based on Taoist and Buddhist principles. The religion's following of up to 70 to 100 million people by 1999 led the Chinese Communist Party to institute a policy of persecution to the point of genocide against what it saw as its biggest threat. They said it was a threat to the atheistic rule of the Communist Party. And the only person who wanted to persecute it was Jiang Zemin, then the head of the CCP. Now, you wrote in an August 9th email to the Epoch Times, quote, I am surprised that a genocide charge against the CCP on Falun Gong has not become a focal point in international human rights campaigns targeting the CCP. And folks, when that happens, and it does seem to be moving in that direction, because even Secretary of State Blinken has put sanctions on Chinese Communist Party officials for persecuting Falun Gong practitioners. It's already moving in that direction. And again, this is not even a partisan issue now. This is a bipartisan issue. Once that happens, the CCP is going to be in its death throes, because this is something that has blood on the hands of almost every single leader within the Chinese Communist Party. The number of people with blood on their hands within the CCP, this would be the end of the CCP. If the full extent of this genocide, and that's what it is, were exposed to the world, live organ harvesting, torture, slavery, sexual abuse, too graphic to even discuss. I think I do encourage you all to look into it, the sexual abuse of Falun Gong practitioners, especially women, like gang rape in jails, like being raped with electric batons. This is what's happening in China right now. And why are the media not talking about it? Why are the major mainstream news outlets not talking about this? 100 million people persecuted, subjected to every piece of genocide in terms of what you would constitute as genocide, but not being called out as such. Once that happens, the CCP is going to be in its death throes. All right, folks, that said, it's getting a bit late, so I'll call it a night. Always enjoy doing these lives. Again, I do them every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So tune in. We'll be going over a lot of stories. Really, if anything these days, there's no shortage of news stories. And so I'll be giving you updates on all the major stories and a lot of stuff you may not be hearing elsewhere. That said, also be sure to check out some of the special feature content we have exclusively on Epoch TV. That's epochtv.com/crossroads, including some of the exclusive content of Crossroads we have on there, and especially the upcoming feature series we're going to have, which is, again, looking into the ideological history of communism, starting August 14th. Check it out, folks, epochtv.com/crossroads. That said, as always, appreciate all of you. That said, folks, again, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.